Well, Ian Murray, the Labour MP for Edinburgh South, joins us now. Morning to you.
Very good morning.
Jeremy Corbyn's been very vocal in his warnings about the impact of a no deal. Is he right?
Well, I think he is right, and I think all the Treasury, the Fraser of Allender Institute that has just released that report that was mentioned in your news bulletin are all correct in saying that a no-deal scenario in terms of leaving the European Union would be disastrous, not just for the UK economy, but also for the EU economy. So we need either a good deal, I would be championing for the single market and the customs union, or indeed put this back to the people to see if this is why the reasons they wish to leave the European Union.
But if the Labour Party agrees to vote against Theresa May's Chequers proposal, which seems likely, doesn't that make a no deal a greater chance of a no deal?
Well, what it would have to happen, I think, is that, don't forget, if there is no deal, there is no transition period, so we would fall out of the European Union with nothing come the 29th of March. So there's a whole host of things that would have to happen, including the government have committed to come back to Parliament with the options on the table that would be required to take the position forward. So I think there may have to be an extension of Article 50, a suspension of the process for when we leave the European Union, or there would have to be some kind of renegotiation. But I'd be certainly championing for a people's vote. There won't be a general election. The Fixed Term Parliaments Act requires 2/3 of MPs to vote for a general election, and the Conservative Party will not do that along with the DUP. And therefore, we're in a scenario where I think the conference and the Labour conference have taken great strides forward to go back to the people and see if this is what they wanted when leaving the European Union.
So what is your preference at the moment? Because right now we have the Chequers proposal and we have the prospect of a no deal.
Well, they're both really almost as bad as each other, because the Chequers proposal already has been discounted by the European Union. This kind of proposal was discounted 2 years ago, it was discounted last year, and it was discounted when it was formally put forward by Theresa May at the summit last week. The European Union have been very clear that they're a rules and legals-based system, and if you want to participate in the structure of the European Union, you have to stick by their rules. So it looks as though we're now heading for some kind of Canada-type deal, which is not good enough for the United Kingdom, would not resolve the Northern Ireland issue, which is the biggest and most potent issue in terms of this entire process.
Would that be worse than a no deal in your view?
Well, I don't think it would be worse than a no deal, but I just think this is not the way that the UK should be going. If we end up in a Chequers plus, Chequers minus scenario, or a Canada type scenario, that's why I think it should go back to the people for them to decide whether or not this is the process they wanted from leaving the European Union, and these are the consequences they thought would happen when they voted in 2016. I think that's a democratic thing to do. It's what trade unions do when they ballot their members for strike action, or if they're balloting their members for pay rises, they go back and say, this is the deal we've negotiated. Is this something you would like? It's a democratic process and something that should happen. Yeah,
but there's so much confusion within the Labour Party on this at the moment, isn't there? Even yesterday, after Keir Starmer seemed to get a pretty rapturous applause from the audience, we then heard the Unite Union contradicting what he'd said.
Well, I think Len McCluskey, the General Secretary of Unite, has to do what his members want him to do and look after their jobs and protect their prosperity. That's what he's paid to do, and I don't think he's doing that in the right fashion at the moment in terms of the way he's dealing with Brexit. I mean, Keir Starmer is merely reflecting the fact that 90% of Labour members want a people's vote and 75% of Labour voters want a people's vote. I think the reaction to Keir Starmer when he gave that line yesterday of Remain being on the table in a people's vote was the way in which the country would be looking at it as well. It was the right thing to do, and John MacDonald and Jeremy Corbyn contradicting that are completely wrong, because there will not be a general election, and therefore if the Labour Party votes against the deal in Parliament, which looks likely because it will never meet the Labour Party's 6 tests, then does that mean we would go into a people's vote trying to campaign for no deal? That's completely
impossible. But if there were to be another referendum, I mean, what would you say to the Labour supporters who voted to leave the EU? Well, the party not just turning its back on them?
I've done a lot of work in trying to understand why people voted to leave. Much of it was not to do with the EU, but to kick the Conservative government. A lot of people since 2008 feel as if they've not got a handle or a stake in the economy. There was lots of local issues to do with the NHS and education and public services. And the people who wanted to leave the EU for reasons to do with the EU, we have to explain the consequences of doing that, the way that the economy would go. And we see that from all the analysis and say, yes, the EU is not perfect. We've never said it was perfect, but let's fight within the EU to change its structures and make it more responsive to local needs and local democracy, and to address those problems of why people voted leave. But leaving is not the option. We're merely cutting our nose off to spite our face in this particular process.
Why were you not at conference this year?
Well, I was at the Foreign Affairs Committee. We're on a delegation to China and Hong Kong last week, and we're doing a massive report into China's place in the world, and as part of the Foreign Affairs Committee, and it was just a diary commitment that I couldn't then go to conference, as well as being in China last week as well.
Okay, thanks very much for speaking to us this morning.